Now, regular followers of this channel will be aware that I've been gathering Spider-Man and Zoids comics for, I don't know, about a year now. And I suddenly had this thought the other day that there was a reason why I was doing that. And I haven't actually done the video really behind the reason for that. And the reason for it largely was because there was a storyline in the Spider-Man and Zoids comics that I thought was really sort of quite dark and quite surprising for a comic that was ostensibly based off the back of a children's toy line. And it all began here, not in Spider-Man and Zoids, but in Secret Wars. And this was actually the first comic that included the start of the Zoids storyline. Because you might be able to see that down the bottom here it says and introducing Zoids. And Zoidzilla, of course, is fully on the front cover there as well. I don't think this one has the giant free poster. I've half thought about acquiring the giant free poster version of it, but of course people will try and up the price somewhat for that one. But what I'm going to do in this video is show you the strips that make up what was called the Black Zoid Saga. And I've literally, over the last few days, taken the time to properly read all of the Zoids strips from Spider-Man and Zoids and Secret Wars, of course. And it really was fascinating to see how they interlinked not just what was happening on the planet Zoidstar, where our heroes or our anti-heroes had crashed, but also an Earth-based storyline and the consequences that was then having on Zoidstar as the story was unfolding. And it's really sort of, when you look at it as a grown-up, it's actually quite sophisticated what they did with it. And there are little hints at what was going to be happening, a little bit of foreshadowing here and there. It's really cleverly done. And this was, a lot of this was Grant Morrison, but some of it was also Simon Furman. And some of it was also Geoff Senior on art. So, you can see there's a lot of the sort of the Marvel UK, but also the sort of the wider comics universe, just sort of testing stuff out in this random comic strip based on a kid's toy line. So I'm going to switch over to showing you some of the issues, and I'll just kind of talk you through the storyline and just explain why I think it's quite innovative for its day. I mean, I think a lot of the concepts we've probably seen before, but nonetheless, it's done in a way that I wouldn't have expected to see it in, as I say, a comic toy tie-in. So I'm going to crack on. All right, so the Black Zoid Saga. A little bit of backstory. So we're up to issue number 9 of the main run of the Zoid storyline here. So we've had quite a few issues. And we've established that this character, Silverman, who is the main protagonist in terms of this part of the storyline, has exhibited some slightly odd behaviour to this point. He's a little bit aloof, he's a little bit cold. And there was one bit of foreshadowing that I noticed when I was reading the run-up issues to this one, in that it's quite a warm planet and everyone else is kind of stripped off and put on different uniforms to disguise themselves. But he just puts his uniform on over his existing clothes, which is interesting. And it gives quite a lot away in the sense that he isn't like the rest of the crew. So that's why he's doing that. So what I've done here is picked out the issues that are particularly focused on the Black Zoid Saga rather than the more sort of incidental ones. There are lots of other storylines going on. To give you a bit more background, there are Blue Zoids and Red Zoids, and the Red Zoids fight the Blue Zoids to try and establish some sort of dominance over the planet Zoidstar. In that mix is Krark, the Prince of Darkness, who is an aircraft type Zoid, so he flies, and he's roughly on a par with the leaders of the Red Zoids and the Blue Zoids. But his goal in life is to unite the Zoid factions to create an army that can take over the galaxy, basically. Which is kind of what the Zoidarians, who are the people who created the Zoids, used to do. They used to have a galaxy-spanning empire, but then they gradually sort of shrank, and they ended up back on Zoid Star, carried on doing their heroic combat bit there, but then there was a disaster planet-wide that wiped virtually all of them out. So we now have a group of crew and convicts from Earth who have crashed onto Zoid Star. Silverman was in charge of the mission, in effect, and we have Hela, who is the captain of the ship, and a few of the convicts and a few of his crew, and his son, who are now trying to survive on Zoid Star against the Zoids and are trying to fix their ship, which you can see on the front cover here. So a bit of the ship survives the crash, enough that they can kind of jury-rig it into a flyable ship again. But there is a Zoid between them and the ship at this point in time. And as we can see on the front cover, this is Silverman getting clobbered, seemingly. And as it says, death kills, or does it? Well, normally it does, but not always. So here we have this Mantizoid blasting away at Silverman, and much to the surprise of the other humans, he just gets up, which shouldn't really be possible because the Zoids have far superior firepower. And, you know, given that they're normally going up against fellow machines, going up against a puny flesh bag shouldn't be much of an issue for them. But he gets up. So the Mantizoid says target still active, action, increased laser charge, repeat attack, which he duly does. And again, Silverman is hit. And Rolo here assumes that that's categorically it. You know, there's no way. But he still gets up again. But now we see the rub. Now we can see that Silverman is not a human. And he is, in fact, an android. And he's a very tough android, because even a machine you would think would get injured by a Zoid laser blast. But in fact, he's still standing and continues to be standing and takes out the Zoid pilot that was steering the Zoid that was taking pot shots at him. So in amongst this, we see the efforts of Redhorn and Mammoth here, who are trying to find blue Zoids to mutate into red Zoids, which is how red Zoids are formed, generally speaking. So that's what they're trying to do there, which means that the Zoid that the human characters are using to get around, which is a Spider Zoid, is also away from base at the moment, which is why Silverman isn't going to get immediately challenged by the humans. But as you can see, there's an injured crew member here, and they're going to try and sort of keep running ahead of Silverman, basically. But that's going to be, you know, no easy task because they haven't got any mechanized help. So they've got components that are needed to fix the ship, which Silverman wants. But Silverman also had to protect the ship against the Zoid. So his mission now, as now becomes apparent, is to get off Zoid Star, because he's got his own agenda. Because obviously he's been programmed to have his own agenda. So in the next issue, we see Redhorn and Mammoth taking the Spider Zoids apart, broadly speaking. And the Spider Zoids aren't doing ridiculously badly, but they're only little Zoids, so they don't really have the firepower to deal with heavy-duty armor on these two. Redhorn is the leader of the Reds, so you know he's mightier than most. Mammoth is actually originally a Blue Zoid who got mutated to become the second in command of the Reds, although it's a rather sort of tetchy relationship that the two have. So again, we see that these three guys here are going to split up to try and pull Silverman away and give each other a chance, and they're going to take one of the components with each other. So this guy's injured, so he's the roller here. He's going to be in trouble basically, and Celeste is the name of the ship. So Silverman sees what they're doing, and he's obviously sort of doing his mechanical thinking as to what his reaction to that is going to be. So it's all going fairly badly for those three at the moment. Equally, the humans have taken the Spider Zoid into the Spider Zoid nest because they thought that's what the Spider Zoids would expect them to do. And they have the last Zoidarian, the Namer, with them there. But but they then mimic being a dead Spider Zoid in order to try and keep themselves safe. But you can see here eventually the cockpit being opened like that is a sign of Zoid surrendering. So this Spider Zoid decides that he's going to surrender on behalf of everybody else in the nest in order to try and save the remaining Spider Zoids. So Rolo is found by Silverman, but then he manages to find this little sort of crevice and breaks away into an underground river and gets swept away. So that allows him to evade Silverman even though he's wounded. But unfortunately this guy decides he's going to have a crack at him himself, which is very stupid because he's just survived a direct hit from a Zoid and he thinks that his pea shooter is going to be able to take Silverman down, which of course it isn't. So Silverman returns fire, but Boston bites the dust, basically. So Silverman tells us here that he is an MX-30 Supervoc belonging to the government of Earth. And we also learn later on that he's created by a corporation called the Cybersol Corporation, which has a lot of... They basically sponsored the mission to Zoid Star under the guise of setting up a penal colony there. But actually they weren't doing that at all. So we're on to issue 19 now. I'm trying to think why I jumped there. I think because we don't see Silverman for a while until this point. So they track Silverman to what seems to be an abandoned factory, an abandoned Blue Zoid factory. And this is nice, it's got Geoff Senior artwork in it. And Geoff Senior did a lot of artwork for Transformers and things like that in the 80s for Marvel Comics in the UK. So we now have a little bit more exposition, as you can see from the speech bubbles here. So there's a bit more chatting going on here as they try and figure out exactly what Silverman's motivations are. And basically it transpires that the convicts were going to be sent down to Zoid Star to see how long they lasted, basically. That was the basic aim. And whilst Hela tries to reason with Silverman, he just gets clobbered by him, basically. And he's basically sort of saying, he's got the component they need. So, if they want to go anywhere, they're going to have to cooperate with him and help him. So we get this little interlude where a couple of very old Zoids are trying to find their version of heaven. And meanwhile, Hela is still trying to hold out against Silverman. Now he does manage to, because I'm not sure this would actually work, but he throws sand in the face of an android who presumably doesn't have eyelids and therefore wouldn't really be phased by that as a concept. But I guess it obscures his optical sensors long enough that it gives Hela a chance to sort of to smack him and damage him further. And still, Hela is armed. So, as we can see here, basically Hela sort of blows him off a cliff, and they have the component that they need, so they leave. Again, rather nice sort of big image there. It turns out that the heaven of the Zoids is not actually our style of heaven; it's actually eternal combat, which is unfortunate because this guy really wanted a little bit of a rest. So. Oops, that was, I've got it in the wrong order. Sorry, let me try that again. I need to double check the rest of it is in the right order before I continue. That makes much more sense. Okay, right. Okay, let's try that again. So, issue 17. I should re-edit this, but I'm not going to because it's just one of those quirks. So issue 17. So here we've got Krark, the Prince of Darkness, as I've previously mentioned, attacking a Blue Zoid factory. But this Trooper Zoid here is not a Blue Zoid. He's actually being piloted by Griff, who is Hela's son. So, ironically, at this point, Griff has just blown up, I think. Or is about to blow up another Blue Zoid to get out of this factory. So Krark thinks he's turned. So Krark thinks he's behaving as if he was part of Krark's army, so Krark doesn't blow him to hell, basically. Which is just as well, obviously, for our heroes, because it means that Hela's son survives. And at this point, we can see that we've got Zed and Z are here thinking about going to find Metalon to go to the sort of the Zoid heaven because they've had enough. So as Krark gives them his blessing ish, and off they go. So we've got Gore, the Lord Protector here, and Zoidzilla, who are being dispatched to try and find the humans, to find Krark, because there's another Zoidarian, as it turns out, who's in control of the Blue Zoid factory. He thinks they're all in it together. They're really not, but he has issues, basically. Now here we find that Silverman is threatening the humans, basically, saying that he wants the components, he wants to get aboard the ship so he can go. But he has goofed, because although he's very capable, they've realised that actually he's made himself vulnerable because he's carrying ammunition which is from a Zoid. And so the humans, just before he can react, take a pot shot not at him but at the ammunition he's carrying and blow up the ammunition. So they damage him quite badly in the process. But again, he's gone by the time they realise that the Zoid that's approaching them isn't going to attack. It's actually Griff. So there is another issue with him in it just before this, where he sort of establishes what he's planning to do and how he's going to do it. So he's been stalking Zoids and just sort of testing how strong he actually is against them, so that he can then try and get the ship which he needs to leave. So in the next issue, and this is the lead up to the one that I accidentally showed you a little bit earlier, we've got some more nice Geoff Senior art. But in this issue, they are again pursuing Silverman because he's leaving a bit of a trail behind him because he was damaged when they blew up the ammunition. So they're following this trail to try and find him, which is cool. Again, I just love the artwork in this is really, really brilliant. So we've got these two little, I think they're called Cosmozoids. So the two little flying blues are still trying to find this sort of mystical place. And this was interesting because it introduced the concept of these wild Zoids, as if they were sort of Zoids that weren't built by the Zoidarians, but had somehow developed independently as creatures. So I say it's interesting because in the Japanese cartoons that are based on Zoids, this comes around again, where you get this idea that there are sort of organic Zoids rather than just constructed Zoids. So I've no idea if any of this comic influenced those later cartoon series, but that may be a thing. So those guys don't do so well, and one of them gets taken out. Equally, the humans are sort of pretty sort of exhausted, and they've lost Silverman's trail, but they then come across the factory and get jumped by him, and that's what leads into the showdown. So Carradine there is being held at gunpoint by a slightly battle-damaged looking Silverman. Now, bearing in mind this is a weekly comic, we go from it would have been 19 actually, so we go from July until November not seeing anything from Silverman at all, and we rather assume that having been shot and pushed off a cliff, that was the end of Silverman. But Captain Hela made a tactical mistake because he left him in a factory. But that isn't where we first see him. This is a whole sequence where the humans have managed to upgrade their Zoid to a great Gorgon, which is quite a significantly heavier duty Zoid than their little spider Zoid was. And they've stumbled into this place called Astoria, but here we see Silverman come back, but it's only in a dream state. So we get Silverman as a sort of souped up android, because Hela's mind is getting probed with a view to him getting killed by Redhorn's android. That's a whole different storyline. But basically, he's trying to sort of browbeat Hela so that Hela will give up, and Hela's not in a giving up sort of mood. But interestingly, we see this is foreshadowing as well, but not in the way you might think. And ultimately, they bring the Great Gorgon into this city. They battle Redhorn's Well, no, sorry, actually, this is Redhorn trying to pilot the Gorgon. They've got a little Zoid, but that gets wasted fairly rapidly. But interestingly, it turns out that Red Zoid androids can't pilot Blue Zoids, which makes perfect sense. But for some reason, Redhorn thinks he can get away with that. So that's a bit bizarre. But anyway, they leave him there, and they all move on again. And ultimately, Hela is snapped out of the nightmare that he's busy having. So a little bit of foreshadowing there, and we're getting towards the crux of the Black Zoid saga now, but we're still not there yet. And bear in mind how long this has been in real time. So you really had to stick with a comic for a long, long time to get to this point. So here we actually flash back to Earth. Well, it's not really a flash back, it's a flash present. But on Earth, we see that they would like to get hold of a Zoid, basically, because they've been intrigued by them. And this Cybersol Corporation are the people who are trying to get hold of a Zoid so they can replicate it, because they see it as an arms race kind of thing from their point of view. But now we find out for real, not in nightmares, that Silverman did indeed survive his fall. And as he says, "You shouldn't have left me here, Hela. Not here with all this machinery lying around just waiting to be used. I've been hard at work, you see, bit by bit, piece by piece, and I'm coming for you." And basically, he's not a very nice guy. He's a properly psychotic android. And he has been busy. Because that is what we are going to next see him driving around the place in. Which is unfortunate for all concerned, because the Black Zoid is this sort of mythical thing that all Zoids fear will herald in the end of their world. Quite why androids have mythology in that sense, I don't know, but that is the way of it. So, whilst the humans are sort of busy sorting out the Great Gorgon, Silverman has been busy. So, a few issues later, so again, another month, we get to sort of Christmas time, 1986. And finally, the Black Zoid saga kicks into high gear. Now, an interesting aside here, for those of you who might be trying to collect Spider-Man and Zoids comics because they've never been collected in a single volume, I have found personally that getting issues 40 to 46 or so is the hardest thing to do. Ironically, I was prompted to do this video because I saw an auction, although I'd stopped looking for auctions, but I did see one that was for basically issues 40 through 46. And I thought that's really unusual, and I actually got them just because you don't ever tend to see them in isolation in order to be able to get the Black Zoid saga in earnest. But everything I've just shown you up to now is just the lead-in to the Black Zoid saga, because it then runs solidly for these few issues, which, as I say, probably they may well be hard to get because of the Black Zoid saga, because maybe a lot of people bought it for that, but then they just kind of, they just got rid of those issues or whatever because there were just a few of them, so it wouldn't be like a full run. But anyway, here we have Zoidzilla on patrol, taking out, I want to say it's Slither Zoid. So the Slither Zoid is going to be rusting in pieces from this point on. But then all of a sudden, we get this voice saying, "Zoidzilla, remember me?" And Zoidzilla gets taken out. And there is nothing on the planet that should be able to take Zoidzilla out. He is pretty much the toughest Zoid on Zoidstar, and he gets taken down in just a few shots. And Zayton and Zunder, who are Red Zoid allies of Krark, come across him, and they kind of wonder, they're like a comedy duo, they sort of wonder if they can get credit for taking Zoidzilla out, and they're like, no one's going to believe that. And it's like, yeah, fair. So they just kind of leave him there in the dust, and leave his android in the dust as well. So the Zoidzilla android is there, and the androids like his, who pilot Zoidzilla and Redhorn, probably Mammoth as well, and Krark, seem to have more intelligence and more character than the normal Zoid androids, who are just kind of fairly mindless kind of warriors pootling about the place, doing what they're told to do by the more sophisticated androids. So as a result, it's not as straightforward to drive Zoidzilla as it is other Zoids. You know, you need a different type of android basically to run the leaders. You might ask yourself, why isn't there more than one Zoidzilla if they're just machines? Excellent question. Don't know if it's a resources issue, but at one point we do see several Krarks being warmed up on the blue moon of Zoidstar, but they get taken out before they can join the fun. So there is the possibility that you could replicate the most powerful Zoids, but I guess like most kids, you could probably only afford one big Zoid, but then you'd have a few smaller Zoids. So the comics kind of reflect that. So what we see here is that the humans and the Namer then find Zoidzilla and realize that this is a seriously odd thing to have happened, because nothing should be able to take him out. And then you get red and blue Zoids stampeding, just running away from something, which again is not normal, because normally they'd be at each other's throats. That's their sort of prime directive. So, you know, Hela says, you know, what spooked them? Or ask the Namer what spooked them. And the Namer says nothing like this has ever happened before, and these Zoids are just getting taken out from behind, left, right, and centre. And Hela immediately realises that it's Silverman. Silverman is back, and he's back in grand fashion with his black Zoid. And this is the start proper of the Black Zoid Saga. So this thing, one assumes, is on a Zoidzilla scale. So this is bad news for all concerned. And Silverman is going to make it personal. Even though he's an android, you know, so it's kind of weird, but he's going to make it personal. So the Blue Zoids are ready to mount a defense because they've managed to scavenge Zoidzilla. So they've managed to pull Zoidzilla back to the Blue Zoid factory to try and get him back up and running. And the Namer has actually taken control of the factory. But the Silverman is basically giving them a day. So they've got until dawn to prepare themselves for the worst, which is good of him. And now he's going to leave them alone, and they get Gore and a couple of power Zoids and pull Zoidzilla back to the Blue Factory. But it's really going to be difficult to fix him because they've got to both fix him and fix his android to be able to run him. Because as we know, as I've just told you anyway, his android is more complex. And poor Zaton and Zunder here, and again, this is a bit I hadn't really fully appreciated because they're very unique Zoids. There aren't any more like them that we see, I don't think. So they've got their own characters to them. And unfortunately, I think it's Zaton, yeah. So Zaton, who's this guy with a sort of, he's a bit like a Triceratopsy kind of guy. But Zaton decides he wants to watch the Black Zoid go past, and that is a bad idea because he gets taken out by Silverman. And Zunder is quite upset by this, and he goes to find Mammoth to tell him that he needs to sort himself out because, you know, this Black Zoid is basically going to destroy everything. And as you can see, we've got Silverman here sort of heavily tied into the Black Zoid, and Hela takes Great Gorgon out to try and meet him because time's up. So, you know, we really don't know at this point. It's all pretty serious stuff because Silverman has been established to be a very legitimate threat, and we just don't know how this is going to turn out. And they've got no Zoidzilla to back him up because he's been taken down with the first volley of the Black Zoid Saga. And this is one of the hardest issues to find in my experience. This one took me the longest to find. And this just displays the decapitated head of Gore, the Lord Protector, who is one of the strongest Zoids next to Zoidzilla. When Mammoth defected to the Reds, the Blues built Gore as the replacement for Mammoth. So here we go, and this is Krark sort of flying high above Zoidstar, observing everything that's going on and realizing that this is his chance, because if he can pull the Zoids together against a common foe, he might be able to then keep control of it after the crisis has passed. So he's not daft. Again, script Grant Morrison. It's Grant Morrison writing a lot of this. So he's saying Zoidzilla has been struck down and his blue army withers under the onslaught of the Black Zoids. The Black Zoids just clobbering everything in as they try and defend the Blue Factory. The Red Army grows weak and disorganized under the leadership of the cowardly and treacherous Mammoth. The chaos is coming as it was foretold. My time is coming. I just love the writing. It's really, it's one of those sort of strips where, you know, the writing's quite mature. They're telling a proper story. It's not just a daft, random tie-in with the toys. It's really being done cleverly. And here we've got Zunder is sort of pleading with Mammoth to get his act together, basically, and then Krark intervenes. And Krark is going to try and usurp Mammoth and take over the Red Zoid forces so that they can go up against the Black Zoid. But we don't see the outcome of that, so we don't know what's happening at this point. And meanwhile, the Black Zoid is just laying waste to everything outside the Blue Factory, but then Gore comes in. And because the Black Zoid is busily finishing off every other Zoid going, he doesn't notice Gore coming in to the last minute, and Gore gets a shot in, and he knocks him down. And then he also then hits him with his shoulder-mounted cannon, which is a big gun. And then the fun and games really begin because, unfortunately, Silverman knew that he would be coming up against very powerful Zoids, so he's built in a backup plan. So he discards the wreckage of his outer shell, and we have a Gore-sized, smaller Black Zoid emerging from the wreckage of the really big Black Zoid, and he promptly lops Gore's head off. Scratch one Gore, so Gore's down. And we still don't have a Zoid for Zoidzilla, so we are completely stuffed here. And Gorgon is still coming. But Gorgon is a bit stuck. So Gorgon has become a sitting duck, and therefore not much distraction for the Black Zoid. So things are not going well for our eponymous heroes. And again, as you can see, you know, this guy is much more mobile than Gorgon, and that's the cliffhanger end of this particular issue. Shakum, indeed. So, heads you lose. Yes. Issue 43, a Christmassy issue. And here we see that Hela has in fact survived that shot from the Black Zoid. Yes, I know, spoilers. But the Gorgon is damaged. And I had the Gorgon. It was a really cool Stegosaurus-y Zoid. But it is quite a heavy-duty Zoid, so its armor has managed to hold up to this blast from the Black Zoid, the smaller Black Zoid. And we still haven't got Zoidzilla going, but Griff is having thoughts about taking the place of the android, even though the name is expressly said you can't handle it, because the android is a bespoke android for Zoidzilla. So Hela, Silverman's basically taunting Hela at this point, sort of saying, come on, where's your kid? I want you to watch the brat die. And Hela's going, nope. So Hela does manage to get a shot in on the Black Zoid, but the Gorgon is not in a good state of repair at this point. So that's probably pretty much his last gasp attempt to try and sort stuff out. And as we can see, Gorgon just gets clobbered at this point, so that's it. But Hela is determined not to give up and tries to get up. And then there's a voice saying, Silverman, leave him alone. And Hela goes, no. Can you hear me, creep? Leave him alone. And Zoidzilla is back, everybody. Zoidzilla is back on his feet, but he's got a Griff in the cockpit. This is not going to end well, because Griff is not well suited to pilot Zoidzilla, because he is, you know, basically one of the sort of the ultimate Zoid, and a human really can't handle this. So, the front cover kind of gives it away. Griff's the pilot of Zoidzilla's slaughter. Okay, well, that's a big spoiler for starters. But again, another very hard to find issue of the comic. So, we've got Zoidzilla, and interestingly, I am Zoidzilla, I am rage sculpted in living metal, I am wrath forged in a fierce crucible, hammered out on the anvil of technology, I am master of this world, no, Griff Hela, I'm Griff Hela. Brain feels like it's being brought to the boil, so he's really struggling to actually separate his identity from Zoidzilla. So Zoidzilla itself, the actual mech, the Zoid, seems to have a personality kind of built into it. And that is overwhelming Griff's little human neurons, but he has got enough to take down this particular iteration of the Black Zoid. but it's more than he can handle. So now he's really sort of struggling again, basically. And again, we see that Silverman has something up his sleeve, because again, from the wreckage of that iteration of the Black Zoid comes a Waspinator style Black Zoid. He's growing wings, and Zoidzilla doesn't have wings. And he gets that extra maneuverability, and Silverman very sensibly targets Zoidzilla's head, where the cockpit is, which is only protected by a sort of thin visory sort of layer, and lays waste to Griff's short time as Zoidzilla's pilot. And Zoidzilla again falls. So seemingly at this point, we've lost the Great Gorgon, we've lost Gore, we've lost Zoidzilla. What's left? We haven't got anything else that is a sufficiently heavy hitter Zoid-wise to go up against this guy. So the Namer comes up with a last-ditch plan, which is to use this sort of big welding machine inside the Blue Zoid factory to try and do something. But unfortunately, Silverman's got that clocked, and he deploys his heavy armaments and has a pot shot at the Blue factory. So at this point, it looks like it's pretty much game over. Hela manages to block a shot against Griff from Silverman. But Silverman's basically sort of saying, basically, what should I do first? But then something else happens. And in that moment, the sound begins, clear and strong across the plains of Zoid Star. It is the sound of distant thunder, growing louder, drawing nearer, inexorable, unstoppable. The sound of the united Zoid army. So Krark's done it. He's got Blue Zoids and Red Zoids, and he's rolling in, and they are going to take on Silverman. And of course, Krark is an air-based Zoid. So Silverman's last form, as it turns out, is not going to be the best, because he's put himself in Krark's element. So here we have an air battle. So we've gone from the ground to the air by this sort of 5th issue of the Black Zoid saga. And even, the humans are looking on, the Zoids that have managed to get out of their cockpits are looking on, and everyone is just focus firing on the Black Zoid. And then this apparently is the sound of the world ending. So Krark's taking pot shots, little Cosmozoid's taking pot shots, and a Cosmozoid android jumps out of his cockpit, falls towards Silverman and smashes into Silverman's cockpit. And Silverman deals with him, but of course he does enough damage that the entire flying Black Zoid falls to the ground. And he still gets up because his head is also a Zoid. It's just like, it's proper Russian doll syndrome, this, isn't it? He just keeps coming, but his Zoids are getting progressively smaller. And Silverman is basically saying that he's doing it all for the sake of hate. Hate for your weak bodies of meat and blood. You have nothing of the grace and clean precision that machines know. I am the face of the future, and one day soon we will destroy you all. And so he's about to do his killing blow bit yet again, having gone through all these bodies, when that welder I mentioned to you does actually eventually come in handy. But look, he's still not done. Spider Silverman rather, comes back yet again and is still after poor old Hela. So he's finally run out of Zoids, but he hasn't run out of his own android body, unfortunately. So, finally, the final issue of the Black Zoid saga, with the Avengers on the front cover. I know, go figure. In fact, they don't even bother putting it on as the first page, which is a bit harsh, because you would think after all that, they would have at least given us the Zoids as the first strip in the issue. But no, it's the sort of middle of the comic we have to go to. So finally we get Silverman still trying to go after Hela, even though he's clearly been seriously damaged by everything he's just been hit with. And Hela does a sort of toin toss, and we later find out that he came up the wrong side for him to actually attack rather than run, but he attacked anyway. And he crowbars Silverman's head off, which is fair. Still see Gore's head in the background there as well, which is a nice detail there. So off goes Silverman's head. And he just sort of, he lays into his body, he takes an arm off his body, tells him to die, just die, sort of thing. And we hear this little tick-tack noise in the background. No, there can't be any more. There can't. Oh, Lord. And Silverman has now sprouted little tiny legs out of his skull and is charging to bite Hela. It's just like, I hate you, skirts. I hate you. I hate you. I hate you. And then he just stamps on him. So it does all get pretty daft by this point. And he just goes a bit sort of, psycho, full bore on Silverman. And then Rollo and Carradine drag him off him and say, that's it. That's enough now. It's done. And ironically, ho, 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 he says, it's okay. I'm okay. I just lost my head. Yeah, much like Silverman. And he says, Silverman, he's dead, really dead. I guess we got lucky this time. And then there's this very interesting epilogue, which again, advantage of reading it as an adult, I suppose. I was sort of trying to read it fairly carefully to pick up on the details. And there's this rather nice epilogue, which I'd not noticed, where Krark is sort of looking at the situation and saying, I've made big strides here because I'm now the dominant force in some respects, because he's still got something of an army left. But then Redhorn comes back. We haven't seen Redhorn for a very, very, very long time, because he got taken out in the annual. But he's since rebuilt his body and upgraded it. But this was actually the first time that we saw the new Redhorn body in the comic. And I hadn't really appreciated that before, because we see him come back before the end of the run, but I hadn't realised he'd come back quite so early. But epilogue 3 is I hate you, Hela. And there's this little bit of a twitch from Silverman's fingers. So it's just really clever, because what they did with this, it wasn't just about Silverman and the Black Zoid and him being a sort of bonkers android. Because in order for the day to be won, Krark had to have formed up his army, which he's been doing for weeks and weeks and months over the course of these. In fact, Krark's arrival is what causes the humans to crash on Zoid Star in the first place. So he's completely integral to everything that happens. But that epilogue is very important. Epilogue 2 is very important because it means that Redhorn is back, which means that the Red Zoids have their, proper leader back by the end of the Black Zoid saga. But we also get this little tease that maybe, just maybe, Silverman might be able to pull himself back together again. Now, none of these lines of plot ever got resolved, because there are only another 5 issues, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51. Yeah, another 5 issues of Zoids left in this Marvel run, and that was it. That is where the Black Zoid saga ended, and that is where the Zoids comic very nearly ended as well, 5 issues later. But it was a really, really cleverly done, well executed, sort of resolution-ish to several of the ongoing storylines that they've been doing. And looking back at it now, they were properly telling a story in the Zoid strip all the way through. And even at the end of this one, I think there were clearly going to be plans to take it beyond where it ended, because in the next few issues, we see that Earth has launched a sort of an armed mission to Zoid Star again, but this time, because it's armed this time, it's no longer sort of an experimental thing they're doing. They're going to properly try and get hold of the Zoid with an armed force. So there would have been more, but we didn't get any more. So somebody's at the door, so I better go and grab that. But cheers for now.